Yeah, so we're going to talk about the connection between frustration and expectation. Yeah, we have about 9 slides.
So just give me a thumbs up if you can see this. So there's like, 9 slides. If you take the title and the ending out, it's 8 slides. So fairly short, but I think a topic that is pretty interesting and maybe very apropos given what we are all facing today. I think with the pandemic, this
frustrated at computer,
especially at the computer, right? I mean, you're screening whether it's a tech issue or actually it's someone through the screen or some body of people through the screen. And to understand this emotion of frustration and how closely it's tied to our notion of expectation. So this is our Leadership in Practice class number 17. And so we went through this week putting these together. So let me just try to start by just looking up. We just literally Google search definitions. The word expectation, right? It says a strong belief that something will happen or be the case in the future. I want to focus more on the second part, a belief that someone will or should achieve something. That's expectation. Now you look up frustration. It's the feeling of being upset or annoyed, especially because of an inability to change or achieve something. Now, there's a notion of being frustrated, of course, at yourself, but there's often we are frustrated at others. Understanding that the connection comes right here, that if you have an expectation that someone will or should achieve something, and then when they don't, it doesn't happen, that frustration comes because you're now convinced that they can't, the inability to change or achieve the thing they promised, they thought they didn't follow through, whatever it might be, that connection between the two is what we want to dive into. There's a woman by the name of Carol Dweck who popularized this term, growth mindset. The idea of a growth mindset is having faith in someone. Now it can be in yourself too, but having faith that someone can grow, can grow. Whatever they do now, they can do better. The idea that we are wired and built as human beings to learn. The ability for us to learn something and to get better at it is something that happens from early childhood all the way through till when we pass. That is the growth mindset. However, most of us get to places, whether it's on ourselves, whether it is on other people, that we give up. We give up on that faith. And we move very quickly into what they called a fixed mindset. You know what? I knew it. They can't do it. Yep, that person's always like that, right? They'll never change.
Can't change,
The notion, and we were even talking about the feeling of when you say I'm disappointed, there's a difference.
Yeah, being frustrated with somebody versus disappointed. Disappointed, I think, is when you start to give up, like I'm just disappointed they can't get that done or they couldn't do it. And the notion of disappointment leads you to giving up on people. Frustration is more of an angry, you believe they can and they should, like Charlie was saying, they will or they should. That makes you more frustrated and angry. It makes you want to change it. When you start to use disappointment, I'm disappointed. There's a notion of kind of giving up. It's more sad, right?
So really quick, if you don't mind going into the chat, think in the last week, maybe you have to go back further. Some of us may just be today. Frustration. What made you frustrated? Who were you frustrated at? Because this idea that I think, I think that there's a notion of people say, don't be frustrated. That notion of denying that emotion. But we have learned from not only the researchers, but through experience is that you can't deny the emotion of frustration. It is a human emotion we all feel. Biden, that's lying, yes.
My son, yes.
My son.
My boss.
Stunted career growth.
Too many.
Staff not following directives.
Yeah.
Someone not having priorities in order.
Clients driving you crazy.
Circular decisions.
Ugh. Circular discussions, yeah. Colleagues not listening, controlling.
My boss.
Wasting time because of someone else's carelessness. Frustrated.
Way too many people to name. Karen, it'd be helpful just start to name some, right? Unreasonable timelines, right? I wasted my time because of someone else's carelessness, right? Frustrated at myself, my son, my coworkers.
Yeah.
unable to get to the root cause of an issue. That's very common, where when things start repeating and the patterns, you know it's the same deja vu issue, and you're like, we did this last time, it didn't work.
Ignorance of coworkers.
Lawyer not calling you back, lack of being organized, found companies downsizing, people not listening to me. Executive leadership required something based on numbers, but too removed to understand.
Lack of communication. Yeah, people not listening.
This list is, there's a long list here, right?
Yeah, children driving you crazy. Yeah.
So I'm going to go back to this. What's interesting about this feeling of frustration, it's a lot of energy spent. I think in hindsight, we can all agree. You know, usually when you're disappointed is when we start to pull back and we're not spending as much energy. Frustration is an expenditure of energy. And whether it's being frustrated at yourself or others, we look back. And the reason why a lot of times people meaning well tell you, calm down, don't be frustrated, just a waste of time, waste of energy. Yet the reality is we all hit frustration. And I liked how one of the speakers before, Sri Kumar, had talked about, you know, these bad mental models and horrible thoughts we have. The key to life is not to deny or act like they shouldn't exist. It's to recognize when they exist. And the notion of understanding frustration just is. It's part of being human. It's part of just interacting with people. So I'm going to spend some time looking at frustration in two different ways.
Oh no, if you can mute, if you're not on mute, if you can, that'd be fantastic.
So I'm going to start by sharing a story of an individual we got to spend time with. His name is Wes Moore. So Wes is an individual who wrote just the second book recently, but the first book he wrote, and we met him like a decade ago. And it was a fascinating individual. He's a Black man, grew up in Baltimore, single mother, grew up very poor. Right? Sorry, give us a sec. I think Laura's trying to find the unmuted individual. Grew up very poor, and you know, he had all the makings that you would expect of someone who was going to end up being very unsuccessful, maybe in jail. And he went this amazing path of becoming a White House fellow, Rhodes Scholar. He built a show with Oprah. He wrote a bestseller book called The Other Wes Moore. He became a platoon, I think, captain or some important role in the Army, right? Someone in command, in charge. And went on to work at Citibank, and now he is the CEO of the Robin Hood Foundation, which is one of the largest nonprofits. I mean, he is accomplished by any which means. And so this is going back, I guess, around 10 years. He was in New York City working at Citibank, and he's reading the paper from his hometown in Baltimore. And as he's reading the paper, he reads about an individual by the name of Wes Moore, grew up in Baltimore, Black, single mother, who just got caught for robbing a jewelry store and has been sentenced to life imprisonment. And that's kind of weird, right? When you read someone who has the exact same vitals and specs as you do, but is actually same name, grew up in the same place, never met him, but is now, life imprisonment, right? And you can imagine the number of people may have even called you saying, oh my God, is this the Wes? Are you okay? And you're like, no, that's not me. It's just another individual with exactly the same specs, but just not me. And so he started corresponding with this other Wes Moore in prison, first over letters, and eventually went to go visit him. And the most profound conversation he had with this other Wes Moore.
That's why I'm cleaning, okay?
Oh no.
This is what we call frustration, right? That's all right. We all have to clean in, listen to leadership talks. This is okay. So the other Wes Moore. So the Wes I know went and had a conversation and asked the other Wes Moore, are we a product of our environment? Right? You've heard that phrase a lot, right? People are a product of our environments, born in the wrong zip code, born in the wrong country, or born in the wrong situation. And it kind of basically plays your life out, right? You're born on the wrong side, and that's how you turn out. And the Wes in prison, the individual who had life imprisonment said, we are not a product of our environment. We are a product of our expectations. Look at what happened to you versus what happened to me. Everyone told me that I am gonna be a criminal. I am gonna go onto drugs and I am gonna do crime and I will end up in prison for life. And that's exactly what happened. But given that you were growing up in the very same environment and situation as me, how did you end up where you are? And this notion of that we are not a product of our environment, but that there is something even more powerful, which is that we are a product of our expectations. But then you have to ask this question. We had this conversation with Wes when we first met him. So where and who sets our expectations? Is it up to us, right? Because then why can't we all just believe we'll do well and we'll do well? Like, how does the process of expectation setting occur for us as an individual? And I don't know if you've heard this phrase before, this idea that we are the sum total of the 5 people we keep closest to us. The 5 people that you choose to go to for counsel, for advice, for guidance. Our advisors, our mentors, our coaches. The 5 people we keep closest to us, that we are the sum total of them. And these 5 people are the individuals who influence our expectations of ourselves more than anyone. And the argument when you are a child is that you don't have a lot of choice, right? You don't have a lot of choice when you're 5 years old, who you go to for counsel, for advice. It's oftentimes your parents or uncles. Like, I mean, it's the adults directly in your life. But at a very early age, and it's not even being an adult at 18.
Yeah, I feel like when you're 10, 11, 12, you start to get a sense of who's good for you, who's not good for you, the kind of people you think more of you or expect more of you versus don't. You know, like when you're kind of in that, I think that middle school range, you know. But yeah, you get to choose those people, and that's the point, right? Even at a pretty young age, you get to choose the people that you listen to and that you go to.
And I think of 5 chairs around you. Who do you give that seat to? Now you can act like, well, they just take the chair and I have no choice. That's not true. Starting at a fairly early age, and it might be 11, even 12, even 10, but like at a fairly early age, at the early onset of even being a teenager, we get to choose. And that oftentimes means we sometimes have to kick people out of a seat. And that may mean that we stop going to them for advice. When they give us advice, we find a way to say no and walk away. But to find a way to dial down the people who you don't want on those seats and dialing up the people that you do want. Now, oftentimes the mistake we make is that we don't think about the notion of expectations. We think about just our champions and cheerleaders. Right? And oftentimes they build, and we used to draw a circle around these 5 saying we build an echo chamber of BS. The people who just tell us you're great.
What we
want to hear. Right? And sometimes it can also be, you know, when we're down, we want to hear, oh my God, your situation is so horrible. Like, you can be a victim. You can actually be blind and thinking you're doing better than you are. But the idea of expectation, I always think about like that 2nd grade teacher, the high school coach, the people who have a growth mindset view of you, who do not believe that you're great because of where you are now, but you're great because where I see you go in the future, how great you could become. And their goal is to help you get there and make you believe, but also give you that truth, that faith balanced with reality. And when they do that well, those seats and those individuals are invaluable. Now, what's fascinating is this. So most people hear this and say, okay, I got to go, right? And not only audit my list of 5 seats, right? I got to go
Find
and go.
people who would tell me the truth, right? Find
Truth,
people
but
who
also
will
believe
hold
in
me
me.
to higher
Like
expectations.
faith and the truth. So like, as in, I got to go find my mentors. I got to go find my coaches. I don't have them, right? But I'm going to propose something different. That this virtuous cycle
is what you need to get started, right?
This virtuous cycle, you can see at the bottom of the screen, it starts with you.
Holding others, right, to high standards. Having high expectations for other people, and what we're going to talk about this in a few more slides, kind of the imbalances that are created when you have too high of expectations versus too low, because that will happen. But to start, if you start holding others to higher expectations, they will start holding higher expectations for you. So as opposed to looking at like, I need to go find people who are going to do that for me, you have to start doing that for others.
It's simply
That's the
saying,
counterintuitive.
give before you take.
Yeah, give before you take. Yeah.
Find a way to be one of those 5 that people want sitting in their chairs. Find a way so that you are not one they want to remove, but you're one that they want to add. And in, whether it's a family or a team, in an enterprise, any organization, when you start to get this virtuous cycle of people starting by saying, I'm going to be a highly sought after one of those 5. There's people who have the faith, the balanced reality, someone who sets and believes that you can do better. And I am going to make sure that like, I'm here for you, not only on the faith side, but I'm also going to give you tough love, the corrective discussions in near real time so that like you get there, because I know you can. And if you start by wanting to be one of those 5 yourself, and you're surrounded in a team where everyone tries, things will work out. And that's what they call a virtuous cycle. So I'm going to walk you through the same concept now from a perspective of data. So I'm an engineer by background. I love data. I don't know, some of you may not like data as much, but I'm a data geek, love it. I love what shows up. And data is what we call exhaust. It's almost like when you drive a car and what shows up at the back of the car, data is what shows up after something happens. So it's always looking backwards, so keeping that in mind. And one of the unique aspects, and I'm gonna walk you through this really busy slide here, that we have at NextJump, we have one of the most comprehensive data sets of people giving each other feedback. Over a decade of feedback data, not only from our organization, but others have gone through in the thousands of organizations. People critiquing, ranking, and the feedback app that you are able to use even in this class. It's built where the word expectation you'll see is built in. It goes from the bottom to the top. Think of it like a GPA, right? 1.0 GPA, really bad student, right? 4.0 GPA, perfect A student. The idea of looking at expectations through the scale. So one is to rank someone saying, you're below my expectations for you. Meaning if you are a receptionist who just started, my expectations is gonna be different than if you're the CEO of the company. I expect you actually to do more, to know better. That's 1, below. 2 is meeting expectations, right? You meet my expectations, which by the way, will upgrade over time when people do better, or downgrade when people do bad.
Right.
You exceed my expectations and you far exceed. And that's the scaling of 1, 2, 3, 4. So when we looked at 10 years of data, and if you look at all the data of all the feedback, say I've given to others, what is the optimal number that you want to get to over time? And that number is 1.95. It's a smidgen below meeting expectations. The best feedback I can give someone over time is to almost meet my expectations, but never quite get there. A smidgen below my expectations, and that is the thing that drives growth.
That's like the learning zone. If you think about Olympic athletes, and there's always those athletes who they never get to that #1 spot, but they're driving hunger to get there because they're always, that's like a zone that very few people, you're not there. I mean, that's the part. You go from the 1s to 4s. You're always up and down. We'll show you that there's on the right-hand side, there's an ideal benchmark. It says 1.95. Right under that, there's a bar graph. And it's showing you that it's actually an 80-20, where 80% of the time you're at between below and meeting. It's 20% of the time you're actually exceeding. I mean, if you think about that, and even in school, right? Yes, they're straight A students, but I think there's a part where, just generally speaking, to get that 4.0, that's like 20% of the time that you should be getting. Otherwise, either the work is not that challenging for you and you should be upgrading, right? As in the expectation should grow, that maybe the work's not as difficult and you should be doing more. But that's like about the rhythm, right? This 80-20, where 20% of the time you're exceeding or far exceeding expectations.
If you think about it, like, so we've spent time with some of the top brain neuroscientists and brain doctors and people who know how the brain works. And they found that the human brain is wired to grow, literally till you go into your grave, which means that you should be able to do better. Because if you are exceeding expectations all the time, that means saying, I can't get any better. I'm perfect, right? I'm exceeding everyone's expectations of me. I am pretty much better than perfect because I've exceeded. And if you far exceed, and I like the way you put it, that if you look at the distribution here of the red, the orange, the green, and the blue, which correlates the colors of 1, 2, 3, 4 ranking. This is the distribution we found that should show up over time, that makes up the 1.95. Because it's not about, so I'm gonna just try to go for it. Well, there you can't even give a 1.95, but I'm gonna do a 2, 2, 2, 2 ranking to everyone around me, and then every now and then give them a 1 so I can get 1.95. That's not how it works. Over time, when you look at the feedback, the criticism, the compliments, the praise you've given people, it breaks out into this distribution. And the way that, like, you explain the 5%, number 4.
Oh, yeah, it's interesting. My mother always tells me, I have a twin sister, Erin. She always used to say, Erin and Megan, we both have children the same age. My oldest is 10. Having children is sort of like watching a baseball game. Baseball games, sorry if you like baseball, but can be very boring. But those walk-off homers, the walk-off homers, those times mean everything. Meaning there are times where your kids do stuff and you're like, that's what I've been waiting for. But it doesn't come around as often as you want it to, but that's kind of life. Like you spend most of the time in the grind, I hate to make it look like parenting is like the grind, but it can feel like the grind where it's just like every day they need something, especially when they're young. It's just heavy, it's hard work, but why people do it? My God, you get those instances every year, every few months where you're like, that made it all worth it. Those times, I think it's very similar in life and when you're growing and in business and you're developing yourself. There's times where you just feel like it's a grind. Am I going to get better at this? And just hard work. But when you far exceed expectation on something and you hit it out of the park, it's like it feels so good. But if that's too often, it means that the work is too easy and you can do more, right? And you need to be upgrading. Yeah, that's hard for people though too. Sometimes they want to stay in that zone where I want to keep getting those compliments, right? I want to stay in that zone. I feel good about myself, but the reality is you start to feel like I'm so good at this already. I can keep getting the compliments for that, or I could try to do something that's out of my comfort zone, right? But it's tough because now you're back to potentially below and meeting, and I want to do better.
So in this diagram, it's interesting. I'll walk you through what seems, it's counterintuitive to understand this. So starting at the very top, if you are giving someone 3s and 4s all the time, right? In this case, more than half the time, this is what we call a low performance zone. It makes people complacent. Think of it this way. The people that I am giving feedback to, oh my God, they exceed my expectations all the time.
Wow.
Right? Yeah. If people around you, you are saying, wow, you exceed my expectations more than half the time, you exceed or far exceed, that over time leads to low performance by those individuals. Right? Imagine your son or daughter coming home and whatever grade they get, you're like, oh my God, right? Like, I don't care if you get B's, A's, C's, just you're exceeding my expectation. Wow, wow, wow. You will see over time they will move to D's and they will move to maybe even F's, or they might just stay complacent. And one of the worst things as a living human being is to not grow. Being complacent, being stuck and not growing is the same as dying as a living organism. Complacency leads to tolerating badness, not only by the individual, by the team, by the enterprise. That low performance zone is dangerous, and it's to recognize the role we play in that low performance zone when we start to give people around us only praise and that they only exceed our expectations. And we give too much 3s and 4s.
Should I show this in the app?
Yeah. So like, I just want to touch the thing on the bottom. The flip side is also true. If I say, you know what, almost, and this is the case where if you are giving so many 1s, right? Your expectation is too high, right? You suck. You're no good. That's terrible. If you are so critical and you're giving so many 1s where that's the bulk of what you're doing, it's another low performance zone because people feel toxic. It's unsafe. They burn out. And this notion of consistent 3s and 4s, consistent 1s, neither is good, which is why the distribution matters. So there's a screenshot that Megan took.
This is my feedback. I'll actually I'll demo through the feedback app, which most of you have. If you haven't done it, you can you can download this now, but this is what we've been using for you all to give us feedback in our COA program, our platform. It's a feedback app, but this is what my feedback looks like in terms of my giving feedback in the last 3 months. So it's actually giving me a rating of my expectations of others is a 1.84 in the last 3 months. And then it shows also, I just took a screenshot of the 12-month view. So it's between 1.8 and 1.84. But you can look at the graph below. You can see by month that distribution of the 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, the ones being the low expectations. If you look at, for example, in April, after the pandemic hit, kind of angry, right? Expectations are higher of what we can get done and what we need to get done. And no 4s, right?
Yeah,
So
70
that's an imbalance, right? But just there's an
Megan's-
imbalance in that distribution.
Yes. Megan's giving no 4s, which if you look at my data, it has some 4s. But on the flip side, by the way, in April, I have
Doesn't
all
make
ones.
you better, you know?
Like I'm saying, but in April, I have 100% ones.
Yeah, not healthy.
And so, which is not healthy.
But over time, right? But it's all about the distribution over time. If you just look at it a snapshot in 1 week, it doesn't tell you that much, right? But if you look at it over time, it's pretty interesting.
So I'm going to stop sharing this. Maybe give you a chance. If you get a chance on your phones to open up the feedback app, I'm going to have Megan.
Yeah.
Megan's going to go through and share.
I'll just walk you through. So I'm just pulling this up right now. I'm going to pull up the feedback app. So the screenshots I just showed you is just pulling right from the app.
And so this is part of a tool. It's a self-guided coach using your own data and then using the power of big data analytics. It's able to guide you, to remind you through simple nudges, like maybe you're being a little too critical too often. Maybe you're being too soft and too praisey, and to find the right balance over time. So
right. So it's telling me, this is again what you just saw, right? That this healthy range between 1.7 and 2.5. I'm at a 1.84. I can also look at the 6-month mark. I can look at the 12-month mark, and it's guiding me towards my expectations and looking for, insights. I think, like I said, April relative to July, my expectations have actually decreased, meaning before I had really high expectations and it's decreased a little bit, but the distribution is a little bit healthier. Like I said, I need some 4s. I need some people to far exceed my expectation. Or maybe my expectations are too high. It's possible. In this COVID window, they're too high. But yeah, so you can see the 3-month, 6-month, 12-month view. It's kind of interesting. And you guys, if you're using the app, you can see, I can look by all the different feedback points, the 1s, 2s, 3s. So I wasn't going to go through all this. I think you're all using it, but it'd be interesting if you guys want to, if you're in the app now, you could look at it and just get a sense of your expectations of COA and the classes that you've taken and the kind of feedback that you're giving. Do you have too low? Is it too high? Is it kind of in that healthy range? It just might tell you something that's kind of interesting about you. And then it'll start to kind of subtly tweak and guide what you're doing.
And so someone even asked, like, what do you do if you aren't the one that sets expectations? Well, see, what this thing is doing is this is your expectations of other people, meaning in that we're the sum total of the 5 people we keep closest to us. This is showing you the data of you being in that seat. You are one of the 5 in some groups of people, and how well you hold them to a high enough expectation, but not so high that it's toxic and unsafe, but not so low that they become complacent and tolerate badness. That notion of how to train yourself and insert your ability to be the most valuable seat that everyone seeks after. Yeah. You know that reaction everyone had? I got to go find myself a mentor. I got to go find myself someone who can send that seat and help me become the Wes Moore who now is the CEO of Robinhood and wrote bestseller books, as opposed to the Wes Moore who had life imprisonment. The way you do it is you start by becoming one of those valuable 5, one of those sought after mentors.
And one of the things we did, I think a lot of people are asking, it is difficult. Now, some people, it's actually very easy for them to be very critical and give critical feedback, but in a lot of cultures, it's much softer, right? And it's really hard to give somebody a 1. It's like a career killing thing to do. And this is why I think what we've done is we've created an app that's anonymous. So it gives the feedback giver a chance to practice giving feedback, because and holding high standards and having high expectations, because it is difficult and you're going to do it wrong to start. So stop sharing.
Yeah, something. Okay. You know, it's interesting. I think there's a Mark Chitton who said, top performers consistently overachieve and they thirst to excel, right? I've always given them 3s or 4s. Well, you know what's interesting about top performers? They say that those who think they're number 1 always become number 2.
Mm-hmm.
Those who are number 1 and hold that consistent number 1 always believe they're a notch below number 1. And so they're always hungry and thirsty to drive for that. And what happens actually is this. There's a term that we learned working with some of the best in the world in different fields. We call it investment in loss. An investment in loss is just a fancy term for doing something out of my comfort zone. Because if I, say play a match or do something and I do well, if I up the stakes, play against a harder opponent, make the conditions harder, constrain myself in ways, suddenly I am now making an investment in loss, meaning that my likelihood of losing, of getting a 1 is very high because I've made it difficult. And if I still excel, well, I didn't make it difficult enough. You'll find this with great personal trainers. If you ever go and watch how the military trains, they know how to get every human being to the point of failure. Meaning there is no such thing as a line that, some human beings never fail. They're just excel everything across the board. They can just tweak and tweak and tweak to make it more difficult so that they will be a point of failure. And that process of failing, because you're trying something out of your comfort zone, more difficult than what you can do today, is the investment that's required to grow. If you keep getting A's, if you keep excelling, that means you're starting to play it safe at some point. And that's when you start to get complacent. And complacency can lead to very bad things. So going back to the presentation.
We should have 2 more slides, or I think 3 more slides. But
so
another way to look at this.
Going into practice, this is a leadership in practice class. What shows up when it goes wrong? It's great for us to be on this left side, having faith in someone, having the growth mindset. I mean, you find this a lot of times with parents. I mean, God forbid anybody out there thinks my kid can't do better, right? I think they always say, especially dads with daughters, this is where it's most fierce. I have a 6-year-old who's going on like 13 or 14, but like she just, I feel, can accomplish anything. Just is amazing.
She could do
like,
no
and
wrong.
if someone ever said that, well, she couldn't learn to do that because she's a girl, I'd be like, wait till you see Olivia. My God, she could run circles around boys, girls, any human being, including adults. This idea of growth mindset. But how do you get to a place where maybe even on the person that you love so dearly, that you want to be their parent, leader, manager, coach, where you end up giving up on them and you say, you write them off. The idea that, you know what, they can't do better than this. This is the best they can do. So Mega and I took separate shots of mapping this out. So as you give feedback.
I helped on this
That's true,
one.
that's true.
This is not fully Charlie's. The next one is more mine, but
It's not, I helped a little bit too. But
it's 50. It's 51% his, 49.
If you hate mine and love
Doesn't
Megan's,
matter. Doesn't matter.
damn you. But
Give the feedback in the app anonymously,
honest.
so we
You can
don't
be
know
honest.
who you are.
So map really quick here, right? Looking at expectation and frustration, what you'll find is generally what shows up. There's 2 paths that show up. You're either going to be person A or person B. And this is where when you start to truly audit, there are times in my life when I'm most frustrated, right? Which side do I fall in? And there's a term we've used over time, which some people have not liked, but just it's easier to just use these terms. Insecure versus arrogant, which means that these characters of confidence and humility, when they get imbalanced, and we're all imbalanced in one direction, we tend to be over humble and we act insecure. We tend to be overconfident and we act arrogant. And these things show up on a consistent pattern in some of the worst mistakes that we tend to make in our lives. So if you audited yourself, you will be able to see which side you tend to fall into more often. Now, the interesting thing you might see is that sometimes we are flip-flopped from person A to person B at work versus at home, which tends to usually be because when you suppress your emotions and suppress your ability to fully be yourself, you'll see the flip side shows up sometimes with a spouse or with your family, kids, parents, siblings, and then the work side acts all insecure and humble. You go home and you're barking out orders like crazy. These things happen too. But what you'll find is this, the these notions, if you're insecure, having low expectations of others, and then easily and quickly becoming frustrated at yourself inwardly, they're like siblings that sit together all the time. If you're on the arrogant side, you have expectations that are too high of others. And then as a result, you're frustrated outwardly, also show up together very often.
Yeah. So for example, at the top, I'm more person A than Charlie's more person B. If I have expectations, somebody's going to get something done, but it's a low expectation, but I think they can do this, and then they don't do it. My first thought is, I screwed that up, right? I should have set them up better. I should have prepared them. So my frustration looks more inward, right? I should have set them up better. I should have prepared them more. What?
You do that. I should have known they couldn't do it.
I should have known they couldn't do that, right? Like, and then I get frustrated at myself for even letting them try. That's me at my worst. Why did I even let them try? Now I'm frustrated. I'm disappointed. Like, how could I do that? So it's all inward. Like, I messed that up. Like, I set them up to not be able to do that.
And the flip side happens for me. I'm more person B at my worst, right? Remember, this is what
worst.
shows up at our worst, which all of us have our days of worst, or moments of worst. My expectation, it starts good, right? I really believe in people. I believe their ability to do almost anything and accomplish, and that faith is very high. But so I believe they will or they should achieve, right? By the definition of expectation, something will or should achieve. But when they don't, I am frustrated as hell at them. And then my ability to coach them, help them is hard because my own emotion, it's like I'm on fire, and I am, if you're ever frustrated at someone and then you're trying to actually act helpful to them, you're not very helpful to them. And you usually regret in hindsight all the things you did and all the things you said.
Yeah, and then for me, blaming myself in front of them, then they take a complete victim, right? Like, yeah, see, she didn't help me. How did she think I could do that? I was set up to fail. And so it does nothing good.
Well, it does bad because people say, Megan, you're exactly right.
Yeah.
Like, how could you have expected me to do that?
Right.
You're totally right. Like, it's your fault, not mine at all.
Wow.
And so
our biggest, if you were at our class last week of conflict and yelling, some of our biggest fights are exactly this. Maybe click on the next.
Yeah.
This is the balance of what they call tough love. If you can find the right balance of tough love, but not so extreme that you're so frustrated with others or you're just blaming yourself, tough love is that where you're too easy on them is coddling.
Tough love is good. Tough alone is bad. Love only is bad.
Yeah, coddling and being unreasonable, neither does anything good. I think that was
so how do we solve for this?
Yeah.
A couple quick tips to help you. First and foremost, do not deny the emotion of frustration. It just is. It shows up. And if you act like you're not, and you're saying, I'm never frustrated, and people see you as someone who's never frustrated, they have just found a way to deny it, to bottle it in. And trust me, when it comes out, it will be ugly. And you will regret what happens after that. So there are two aspects to think of this. As an insecure person, you have to, when you start to go inward, ask yourself, would I do that?
Yeah,
what would I do?
It's the thing that helps me the most when I'm most frustrated at myself, for maybe what I feel like is I just set them up to fail. See, they can't do it. Why did I even let them try? Which is terrible, right? Because that leads to this giving up and fixed mindset. As I'll think, wait, would I do that? What they just did? And this is going to lead to the next slide, which is the expectations you hold for yourself. If I have high expectations for myself and I wouldn't do that, why am I letting them get away with that? Why do I let them off the hook, right? Well, I wouldn't do that. So why do I think it's okay that they did that? And that helps me kind of balance more towards looking at what they could have done better.
Now, as an arrogant individual, right, when you have more confidence, it's so simple on one hand, but it's something that we forget to do when it's most important. You need to burn off your emotions. We talk a lot about this notion of 51%. 51% by definition is majority. When our anger and frustration is at 51%, we are in what they call emotional tilt. When we go and coach, lead, and try to help someone on emotional tilt, nothing good happens. But the act of working with a TP, a training partner, with someone else, not the person you're trying to coach, and you burn off your emotion, which means go into it. Talk about your frustration. Talk about how you feel they screwed you over and whatever it might be. And all you have to do is get that 51% raging flame emotion to 49%. It's 2 percentage points. And because it's not majority, you can now still hold a tough and have a conversation coaching someone where you can still be direct, you can still be critical, but you're not on emotional tilt. And when you get those things right, you can achieve tough love as in helping others grow. So this is one way to look at it.
The other way to look at it, and then we have one more slide to sum it all up, but a lot of this was on the last slide, but Charlie just walked you through these first two scenarios. So you're looking at expectation and frustration again, but when you look at expectation, if you look at the expectations you hold for yourself and then as a coach, that's what you're looking at on the left-hand side. So 1 and 2, Charlie just walks through. I have high expectations for myself, but as a coach, it goes wrong when it's too low for others, right? So this would be the insecure person. What would I do that is one of the ways to get through that and to kind of balance that out. If you have really high expectations, number 2, for self and too high for others, this is where Charlie was talking about the arrogant one, you need to vent that out. I can't remember the build on this. So that's the insecure arrogant. But then there's 2 more, number 3 and 4. If you have low expectations for yourself, and I'm sure some of you know people like this, or you might be one of them, but high expectations, too high for others, you will be called a hypocrite. I don't expect this of myself, but I expect you to do it. Those are hypocrites. And trust me, the criticism, the critical feedback, it will find you. Because when you are doing that vocally and loud about your criticism and your expectations for others and you're not doing it, that stuff finds you. But
and by the way, it finds you only if you stay consistent.
If you keep going at it.
A lot of people are
Yeah.
masters of what we call playing poker, right?
Yeah.
Lying, hiding, faking, or bluffing. They go from what they really want to do, which is number 3, and they flip to number 4 and act like, and you basically see them kind of like it's like
the wind out of their sails.
Right. It's like a radio broadcast blaring, and then suddenly it's like not,
Right. That last one is I have low expectations of myself. I'm insecure, and it's really low for others. But the insight here that I think is really counterintuitive that we've been talking about is that how to get out of that when you're frustrated with that. What do you do? Where do you start? You're so insecure. You don't think much of yourself and what you can achieve, and you feel your team can't achieve it. That's like the worst place to be. So what do you do? And some would say, well, increase your expectations of yourself. Start working on yourself. But it's actually not the way to get that flywheel going, that virtuous cycle. Start with others. If you start giving, holding high expectations for other people, they will start holding you to higher standards. And then you'll go to number 3, right? Which, you become a hypocrite. But that's a better place to be because it's a chance for them to give you feedback. Otherwise, it's just a really hard place, right? That bottom, right? I'm so insecure. I have low expectations of what I can do and for my team. What the heck are you supposed to do from there? Then it's like, well, yeah, just motivate you. And then people pep talk you. You're better than you think you are. You know what they feel? No, I'm not, right? I don't feel that way. So hold others to high standards. Start with yourself. And that's don't start with yourself, right? The problem is you, right? The problem is you, because if in that far left corner, if you do not have high expectations for yourself, how can you possibly hold high expectations for others? But how you get out of it is counterintuitive. Actually starting with others.
And this is some of the elements of how different theory is to practice, right? Because in theory, everyone says, well, start with yourself, right? Hold yourself to high expectations, right? It's kind of like willpower, which by the way is one of the weakest muscles in our body, but in our brain, but we believe it's stronger than it is, right? That's it. I've committed. I'm going to do it, right? Like the key is this: first, hold someone else to high standards. If you ever look at gym buddies, running buddies, if you ever look at, what we call training partners, TPs, it starts with you holding your TP to high standards, not I'm going to hold myself to high standards, which is why I'm now part of this TP program or part of this running group.
But I'm going to let you atrophy, right? You're just,
like the act of each other holding high standards from myself to Megan does the same for me, is the very thing that gets us to the right place. It's 4 is the worst and you move up. So as an insecure person, you're like low standards in self, low on others. Trust me, as an insecure person, your visit to number 3 will be much shorter than an arrogant person. It literally is like going through the security terminal or the security whatever thing at the airports. Mm-hmm. Just go right through, right? Take your shoes off and check your bags and go right through. But you will spend time there being a hypocrite for a little bit. And then you will start to work on yourself and you'll jump to number 1, which becomes a more common issue that starts to show up. Now I'm holding myself to high standards, but I need to find a way to hold others to high standards. And how do you do that is kind of what Megan put in there. Then the flip side is this: as an arrogant individual, right? I might fake number 4, but to be honest, most times I'm number 3, right? I'm so busy looking outwardly. I mean, if you really gave me open rein to go and judge and criticize everyone around me, you'd be like, wow, that's what you really think, right? Everyone should do that. Have you ever looked at yourself? And if you do that, you will see people will criticize you. You may have to work hard if you don't have, obviously, a feedback app or whatnot to go and find out.
I know you're all judging us right now thinking, oh, this is so ugly, but you all have this too. You just maybe haven't explored it as much, but we are exploring this at the extreme. At our worst, number 1 and 2, and you all will face this. Some of you in the 3 and 4, it's just human. I think this was like the last slide we have, and then we take some questions.
It's so funny when you say you're all judging us. I'm like thinking, you all think this is awesome. You know? So like the difference in human beings, right? Intuition works different ways.
Yeah, this was our in summary. How we started the class was this connection between frustration and expectation. We're saying it's directly connected, right? Your expectation of self and others, how frustrated you get. But if you don't want to be frustrated, which a lot of people say, why do we have to be frustrated? Live a copacetic life. Then don't expect a lot of yourself and others. That's one way to not get frustrated. If you don't expect much, you're not going to be frustrated.
And by the way, put it in red because
none of you should be in that bucket.
This is the fastest path to depression,
yes,
to loneliness, to actually not living life. Because we are born and wired to grow. And that is the very thing the neuroscientists found. That the brain is wired to do 2 things. One is to grow, but the other one is to protect. And it's the protection muscle of not wanting criticism that actually hurts us to the point of actually shutting us down. And so that tension is what we fight all the time. You have to be very careful of being in this. I don't want to be frustrated, so I just have low expectations of everything around me, including myself. That is the fastest way to get to the wrong place.
However, we said to accomplish anything great, it requires high expectations of self and others, right? So that's the only way. That's the only way. I can't even read this because of the camera.
Yeah, so frustration is human, right? So don't deny it. You have to learn to recognize when it happens and how it's happening. If you are able to situationally diagnose and identify when you are frustrated and which component, then comes the notion of training. Find a way to train, because if you train and train on how to deal with frustration, and frustration usually is highest when somehow we're interacting with others. You know, the whole, like life is very different when you're not interacting with others, right? It's like, frustration shows up times 100 times 1,000 the minute an other enters the equation. And so the notion of practicing how to work better with others, you know, everyone knows the power of being in teams and high performing teams, but usually you can't because of all these things, including frustration that prevents us from getting there.
That's all we had from Megachar here. Would love to take some questions from you guys. I know there's been some chat. We haven't been able to follow the chat while we're talking in the PowerPoint, but we'll take a look at some of the questions. If you want to just take a few minutes and throw in your burning questions. Oh, show number 8 again. We can pull up number 8, the slide number 8 again. I think she wants to give me a 4 for the slide number 8.
And if you like to see slide number 7, I can totally pull that
nope,
up
she
too.
did not ask for number 7. Karen was asking for slide number 8. This idea that you're either insecure, arrogant, depending on where you are, you either have high expectations or low for self.
Karen, if you had a question on it or a thought, I don't know if you want to unmute and just ask. And once again, happy to go to slide 7.
How do we do the chat? Oh, we can't lower. Go for more.
I think it's, so I'm going to stop
Karen,
sharing
okay,
so we can see
Karen, did you want to unmute? Go ahead if you want to ask a question. I think Karen from Atlanta. Oh, no, she just wanted the notes, so she doesn't have a question. Okay. Yeah. And this video will be up. I think the PowerPoint we could make available too. Let's see.
So I'm going to pronounce this wrong. Jayden? J-I-T-I-N? Do you want to unmute and ask your question? I think you have a good question. Give Jayden a second.
Oh, the book referenced is The Other Westmore. It's called The Other Westmore.
The other person is Monica. You had a question if you want to ask, Monica Aguilar.
Yes, hi, thank you. I'm just saying that currently I've been having very high expectations or standards for myself, and I translate that into my teamwork, my team colleagues, like people that report to me, but then I have been able to work that out with my team members. My problem right now is with my colleagues, like people on my day-to-day colleagues, cross-functional colleagues, they have these power issues within the organization. That's my belief right now, where they want to hold the truth and they want to be the rocking stars of everything. So it's very hard for me to handle that, because I know, because I've done that for 4 years now, some of them are very new, some of them have higher job titles than I have, but I know how to do stuff, but they're just simply not acknowledging that, which I'm fine with it. But the problem is that it's a very frustrating environment, because they keep missing, making mistakes, very arrogant. The way you were describing that, I can't remember what was the pattern, but most of them are in this arrogance level that I know better, I have a better job title, you were kicked out of this team, and I know I was successful with the job they're doing now, and they're not. So how can I handle my frustration? I don't necessarily want to educate them.
Yes.
I just want to handle my frustration.
So I have two different thoughts of how to look at that situation. The first is, when you said colleagues, so I assume there's more than one person.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oftentimes we try to change all of them at once, versus not everyone will rank at the same level. Meaning, if I looked at, say, even a group of, say, half a dozen colleagues, you can always look at this list, and we call it a CAB ranking as opposed to ABC. C being the person who absolutely does not want to hear from me, absolutely does not want to get better. The person who is most difficult is a C. So there might be two of them there. Then I look at a shorter list of, say, 4, and saying, which one do I think, like, wants to improve, would want my, higher expectations and standards. And likewise, I would think they would want you to do the same for them. Meaning a mutual holding each other. And the idea of, like, when I look at these situations, the problem is it feels like a Fort Knox or a wall that cannot be broken.
Yeah.
The minute you chip away in one piece, momentum is powerful. You need one success story to show this is not true. All colleagues not wanting to, it's all about power and being rock stars and being better than each other, and don't want to hear any critical feedback or, someone, criticizing my world. That's not true equally, say, across all 6. Find the person who is most desirable to grow, to change, to get better, and to work one-on-one with them. And oftentimes it might start with you going first, as opposed to, can I give you ways that you can get better? And saying, like, I'm really looking for a cross-functional colleague to give me some truth and help me get better at what I do, since you are in many ways part of the team I indirectly impact. You're like my customer. Likewise. So, like, kind of go first and start there. And that's one piece.
Yeah.
The other part that you're going to go into the whole trust, like the gas, you have to show that you have gas.
Yeah. I guess I was thinking more about this notion of peer. I was thinking more about the peer side, that I was thinking about how most people will listen to critical feedback from what they consider to be peers. But I think, and the notion of it being not feeling not alone, right? So if all of them, and I don't know how many people there are, a program we call PRT, it stands for pre-resiliency training. It's a resiliency training, right? I think some people are just so impracticed at getting critical feedback and getting truth, but we've set it up where we do it in teams of, say, like 8 to 10 people.
Okay.
It's another way to look at it. It's another way to look at it, where if you can do it in a team base where you have a meeting that you're in and you can all give each other feedback, it's just starting to get in the practice of every week having some rhythm to get some critical feedback as a team, as opposed to one-on-one. But I like what Charlie said too is.
There are some pretty cool questions. One's from Chris Grill, like, it's a cool question in there. BLK Capacity also had a pretty cool question. I don't know if either of you want to unmute, and should BLK Capacity had a couple of questions, but
The millennial piece.
it's up to you guys if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, I guess I'm BLK Capacity. I work with a group of a lot of millennials, and basically, my question in the chat was, a lot of them are self-centered and arrogant, and there's a cross-section of older people that are part of the team with a new group of people, and it kind of piggybacks off the last person who asked the question. It's kind of intergenerational. However, the millennials are kind of holding the information to themselves and working on projects and not including the rest of the team. So how do you kind of break through, so to speak, to work with them with those type of self-centered behaviors?
So this is a great question, and I think some of the biggest misunderstandings of the millennial and now even the centennial generation, there's a sense that they move faster, and in the process of even the information age, they expect immediate everything, right? You want something, they want an answer right away, right? Do I get a promotion or not? Can you just tell me right now, right? Like, as opposed to, well, let me see how you do in the course of the year. Now, can you just tell me how, am I going to likely get it or not? This notion of instant gratification is very heavy in them. However, the other aspect that people rarely understand is that their desire to grow is higher than any generation that's ever existed. And this shows up where, I think it was Gallup when they surveyed employees, and the bulk of the employee population now is in workplace is millennials. The number one thing they wanted when Gallup asked the question, it hasn't changed, is they want to be coached and they want to be mentored. They want to grow so badly. Their love of TED Talks, their love of listening to any speaker or leadership, it's like when I grew up, that's not what I listened to for amusement. You know, I went to, like, you know, Three's Company or other dumb, like, comical cheers, like shows. They literally love this stuff. And so to understand their desire to grow, but they're not understanding that growth takes patience. And growth takes other things that they don't quite understand. So the first thing about is similar to the other question, I think it was Monica that asked, not all of them are the same. And to split the group into that third, meaning that there's the worst third, and you have to know who they are. There is the best third. The middle almost won't matter. Within the best third, you want to find an example you can work with. And so there's two things that we look for that's important within that example of the millennials. In one of the earlier lit classes, we talked about Moneyball. And within Moneyball, there's 5 different levels. And the foundational level, level 1 and level 2, is what you're looking for. Level 1 is what we call GAS. GAS stands for give a shit. You want someone who has a high give a shit factor. If they have high GAS, that is the person you know you have a better shot of being able to coach and kind of break out of this pattern. But number 2 is even harder to find. What we call no LHF. No LHF is the same as saying someone who is transparent, who is able to tell you, we shared another class of ladders of influence, what they're really thinking and processing in near real time. Recognizing most people are playing poker. They're bluffing. LHF stands for lying, hiding, and faking. That when you are trying to help and coach someone who's lying, hiding, and faking, it is near impossible. But we do it so instinctively because to protect ourselves. We don't want to sound dumb. We don't want to sound stupid. I don't want to ask dumb questions.
Yeah, I do feel like it's important that the millennials, I think there's a part where I know everybody's talks about this, right? They're so arrogant, that self-centered. They're so, I feel, misunderstood. I think, you know, they just grew up in a totally different, I mean, the social media, if you think of the way we grew up, most of us here in leadership roles grew up, we weren't constantly being compared to people. Point being, they're so deeply insecure, so many of them. And I think there's a part where
it's actually the most insecure generation.
It's like they need team, they need circles of safety, you know, they need space to actually explore some of the ugly stuff that they've been thinking about themselves, about it. like, and I guess I'm saying this because I found in our own company, we have a lot of millennials coming through. We have a really kind of robust recruiting engine that comes from top colleges in the United States on the East Coast. Like we are bringing, and I think I've always been surprised by how much they value our training partner programs, our PLB, we call it PLB. It's a personal leadership bootcamp program where, you know, you go through tough stuff and we're having them like dig deep into themselves and things that hold them back and what we call backhand versus your forehand. Like, and it's like they actually, I feel, need it more than I expected, even maybe when we started this over a decade ago, because I think they haven't had room to explore it as much because they've just been constantly the social media, the compare, it just was a totally different, and I've struggled because I didn't grow through that, you know, and so to try to understand that more, I think
There's a great cartoon image maybe we'll bring up in one of the future LIP classes that shows kind of like everyone sort of standing on these little mounds.
Yeah.
And then the projection on social media and the internet of this unicorn perfect life, but then the reality of where you are and that gap between where everyone's projecting how great things are and where you are leads them to be depressed. The medical stats are fascinating and interesting in showing that this is the generation that has more mental disorder, right? Depression, anxiety, stress than any generation. And the numbers are skyrocketing at younger and younger ages. I mean, it's showing up as early as like 7 years old.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that they are in constant judgment of each other and by everyone portraying how well they're doing. What's interesting about the notion of arrogant versus insecure, we always say it's every one of us is mushy and soft inside.
Right.
An arrogant person just has, it's like an ostrich egg. If you ever see an ostrich egg, it's so hard in the shell, but if you crack it, it's just mush inside. Versus that, like most bird eggs are like, their shell is soft.
Yeah.
An insecure has a shell just soft.
I've got a bird egg. You've got an ostrich egg. It's like
But
two different
inside,
kinds.
it's mushy. And the ostrich egg is a lot bigger, right? There's a lot more mush in there than you think.
Oh.
And the millennial side, they are the most, hidden, insecure generation that's ever existed. And so what we found was when we gave them the space to process and start to share some of these thoughts, you cannot believe at 21, at even 18 with interns we hire, the level of thinking and processing they have, connecting their insecurity down to
and how aware they can get. I mean, the awareness that some of these young millennials, the awareness they can get through some of the programs that we've run, you wished you had when you were that age, right? Because when you're in your 40s and 50s, you're thinking, geez, if I could get to that when I was 22 or 23, how much further ahead you would get.
You would think they're all psych majors, like psychology majors, having had professional help analyzing their past. No.
Yeah, they just
are doing it on their own.
Yeah.
But they're not sharing it and with others.
They need the space to share it.
And once they start processing it out with other people that they can trust, it changes the whole game, and you start to realize, wow.
Yeah, and you harness that, and you realize they could actually change the world, right? With the coaching and mentoring of older generations who have another skill. I think that it's like if you can marry those two, right? And that's what oh my God, it's like awesomeness.
The person who asked the question, BLK something, right?
Yes.
What's fascinating is this, in your organization, if you are able to show one example of a millennial that you're coaching and they're being open and the other people start to hear about it, you will start to see a flock just coming at you because they want the help. They want the help, and it's just their outer shell of arrogance is what they're showing. And in fact, it's not helping them, but that's what they've been trained to do in the way they've been raised with social media. And so cracking that shell and helping them process and grow, you will start to really get a sense of how hungry this generation is to grow.
There's so many good questions in here. There's so much good stuff. I think there's somebody else had asked a topic we talked about last week, Jeff Hacker, in terms of how to vent out that's less inflammatory and do it the right way. Last week we talked a lot about TPing and how to actually need a safe space to vent that out. Yeah, you don't want to do that in such a public
but even
setting.
the idea of Faithful Fridays and Manic Mondays with an individual, right? And the whole LBR process, that's last week's class. If you watch the video, I think it's like around halfway through, there's a great section on that.
Chris, I don't know, Chris Grill, if you have to go, you guys can go. I know our time is up. I know, Chris, if you're still here, there's a question around high standards for self.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So my question basically revolves around high expectations for myself as well as for my teammates. However, my tendency is to fall back on that insecure side and not always give the the high quality feedback that can better raise the capabilities of the team. Part of that's just like, should I be the person giving that feedback? Am I some of it falls on the because I fall towards that side of things. How do you guys recommend practicing and developing that skill?
God, that's interesting.
I
No,
have,
go
I have
ahead.
two thoughts.
I relate to that so much,
No,
Chris,
I have
right?
two thoughts on this.
Yeah.
First, what's fascinating I find is when someone acts like I am like this all the time, everywhere in my life. You'll usually find as you spend time with them and we coach them, it's not true. Meaning, I bet you there's some parts of your life somewhere where you do not tolerate any badness from the people around you. And it might be like something obscure, like it might be on a, maybe a tech setup, or it might be on some sporting thing. It might be on just how you play fantasy sports. Like this idea that like, I don't hold back my tongue. Unfiltered, I tell you, like if I think it's a good idea, dumb idea, like find that spot and you realize, wait, I am not like this everywhere in my life. And it's important to recognize that because there's a feeling you have saying, why is it without even thought, I tolerate no badness from anybody in this one little area, but I've convinced myself that for the other places in my life, I'm insecure, and then I struggle to give them tough love or good, like critical feedback. So first is try to find that one spot because it usually exists somewhere. There's and usually, especially if you have a spouse or even say with your parents, right? It oftentimes happens, kids sort of feel like I'm right above my parents in something. You have to find that example and almost like kind of snap shoot it because you're like, that clearly I can do. But so then that's what, it's almost like when you do public speaking, they say, practice speaking one-on-one to someone, then practice in front of hundreds, thousands, maybe 10,000 people, but think of who you're speaking to one-on-one. If it exists and I can do it, that means I can clearly do it elsewhere. So that's one tip. The other tip is this. So you want to now take it up a notch, go tougher, say at the workplace, right? In this case, I think you're, Navy, right? So you're going to calling the Navy. First, pick an easier one than a harder one, right? Meaning don't pick the highest costly colleague that will lead to career ruin if you give this, right? So there's one that meaning like trust is over time, like someone who will forgive you if you do it wrong, right? More than someone who won't. And if you're saying no one will ever forgive, there's always someone who is less forgiving versus more forgiving. Find the more forgiving. And then find a topic that is less critical. Meaning there's a range of topics, right? It might just be like, how you choose to do your collateral duties, right? How you do your collateral duties. Criticize them and give tough feedback on their collateral duty, not on their mission. Criticize them maybe on how they are dressed or how, they're, like public speaking, right? Public speaking is a great one. Almost everyone wants to get better at public speaking. And you'll find that you can start small like that and then inch and practice your way up to harder and harder things to like mission critical stuff to really important like managers, leaders, bosses. But this idea of, I think of everything ramping up. We tend to believe like, no, that's like non-existent in my life. Like if you really look at it, it's not true. We do that. And then it's about just finding a transition into my important work with creating a ramp.
That's good. Good advice. I find that with Chris at home, I like when Charlie remind me, you're having a hard time giving that critical at home. I have zero qualms giving that critical. I have such high standard, right?
And very fast.
And very fast.
Right? I mean, the classic thing I'm going to say is, well, like I just need time to think. I can't think that fast. I'm like, but why is it when I've seen you at home, it's like, I mean, even on stuff you don't know, you have a reaction in like a millisecond.
Yeah. Even stuff I feel like I don't know. Very arrogant. Very arrogant.
So meaning there are places that you are very arrogant. Find it, and then you're going to bridge the gap to the most difficult. But it's not a giant leap. It's a ramp.
I was going to say, Chris, too. I think the other thing, I know these are crutches that sometimes can be overused, but I find that I do have to give myself that permission that might be saying something like, this is going to be really hard for me to tell you, or I think you're not going to want to hear this, but I have to just say it and don't look at them in the eye. That's the shoulder to shoulder. I know over Zoom it's probably, but don't look at them because I feel like it makes it harder for you to do something that's already hard to do. And what you find, generally speaking, is it's not as bad as they thought it might be, but for you, it just feels like this is going to be brutal. So I find that I need to give myself the permission to go there and say, I don't think you're going to want to hear this, or
We should run a
this is
whole
hard for me,
class
on all those ways.
just
to-
on crutch phrases,
like-
difficult conversations. The crutch phrases are just the most important thing. It's so small, right?
Mhm.
What Megan said,
Yeah.
this is hard for me, or this is going to be difficult to hear. And then that little like kind of warning sign prepares someone for a punch.
Yeah.
The worst is when you
If there's-
like knock
if
the
there-
air out of them,
yeah, there's no-
unexpected.
Yeah, and I used to ask him way back when he wasn't my boss and we weren't co-leading. I would say, if you would just have let me brace for a second, but it would feel like, hey, Megan, I want to talk to you. Boom, you know, I'm like, whoa, critical feedback I wasn't expecting. But it's amazing how somebody tells you, I think this is going to be a tough conversation. You get to kind of, just like if somebody said they were going to punch you in the gut, you brace a little bit, brace for impact. It's actually not as bad
That
when you
tiny little
brace.
bit.
It's a little bit. And,
Yeah.
and I think for the feedback giver, which is, it's harder for me, I would rather get the punch than actually give the punch. Having to give that, because recognizing it's good and that they need to hear it and it will help them grow. Yes, I have to go through all of that. Like, this is what, if I don't do this, then they're not going to win and they're not going to succeed, and then I'll ruin their career and it could create. So yes, that helps, but in the moment, it's not enough to conjure up the courage. I have to tell them this is going to be hard for me, and I think this is going to be hard for you to hear. And then it's like, just say what you need to say.
And that now there's other, once again, these are all little tips in practice. It's amazing what you can get done with an email or a text. And I know people say, well, you have it face-to-face, but the idea, once again, I think of a ramp, right? I am going to enter this difficult conversation, but I'm going to start by first texting you it or emailing it to you,
Mm-hmm.
right? And oftentimes the worst is people do hey, do you have some time where we can talk?
Oh.
Now this is the worst. The other person's like preparing for battle, right? They're going through,
What
are
did
they
I
gonna talk
do?
about? Let me
Get
come
my
up with a
notes.
rebuttal, and then like, and it's awful because they're so anxious and anxiety driven that whatever you say,
It's cruel.
it's imagine
Yeah.
if you came and did that email and then you started with, you're not going to want to hear this. You're like, can I go first? Because I have a list of issues with you, and you don't even know what they're going to say. You were so prepared for this fight.
Yeah.
But it's amazing if you just give a little bit. Hey, like, I know this is difficult, but I'm a little upset. I thought I'll share it with you. I know we want to talk. I want to give you some time to process. And then they might give you a reaction too, but
It
it's
starts
amazing.
the conversation.
Like,
yeah.
kind of light that match, let the flame burn a little bit, then go have a conversation. And then we've also taught the LBR, which is a break. Sometimes when it gets so heated, like quick bathroom break, a walk around, snap, then revisit the conversation. The key to learn that we tend not to do, and this is the underdeveloped part of emotion, that, I think we shared in earlier classes, we have the emotional intelligence of a 16-year-old. And this is the research that came out of Harvard in studying just people and general adults. If we are able to grow that part of ourselves, I mean, it's unfathomable how much more we can accomplish as an individual, as a team, as an enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth is, we have the emotional intelligence because emotions are messy.
Emotions
It's
are
difficult to
messy.
deal with. And we don't even know how to deal with other people's emotions, but our own, even
Yeah.
worse. And so it's like finding a way to put the difficult thing in front of you so we have to tackle it. And you do that consistently week after week, you'll see it's not as bad as you think. And you start to realize, wait, everyone has the same issue. We all struggle to deal with our emotions. But it's very powerful. It's actually the most powerful tool we have too.